Hello, people from around the universe! I am your host, the Italian Ace, and welcome back to another fairy tale video. But this time, we're not reviewing the 100 Years Quest. No, instead, we are going to be reviewing the first two, arcs of Fairy Tail, or at least what I consider to be the first two arcs of Fairy Tail. And this, if all goes according to plan, will be the start of a new series where I take each and every one of you through the beautiful fairy tale arcs, some more so than others, and give you my honest opinion on them. Of course, we have to start at the beginning, and fair warning, this series will probably be a little spread out because I'm rewatching every single episode for that arc before doing the review of it, just so they're fresh in my mind. And that does mean that it'll take some time to go through all of them. However, I think it'll be really fun, and the two arcs that I have for you today are honestly some of the best beginning/introductory arcs of any anime, at least in my opinion. However, before we get into any of that, cue my intro. Okay, so let's start this off with what I like to call the introductory arc, which is kind of like a mix of standalone episodes and very, and I do mean very, short arcs, like the Lullaby one. So let's dive in and see what I think of this first fairy tale arc. So the first 5 or so episodes are really just introducing and setting up a lot of the main cast. I mean, episode 1, you get introduced to Lucy, Natsu, and Happy. Episode 2, you first see the guild and meet a lot of the members in there. Episode 3 and 4 are the weird Daybreak mini quest / really mini arc, if you want to call it that. And then episode 5 is fantastic because we get introduced to the best character ever, which is Erza. And wow, her introduction is so perfect. Just, you see her for the first time carrying this giant adorned horn, and it immediately tells you all you need to know about Erza Scarlet. Okay, obviously not everything you need to know, but it gives you an idea of just who she is as a person. Like this really strong, super fierce, and just intimidating as hell individual. Of course, when you actually get to fully meet her, you see that she has a personality that goes well beyond just being strong. And that's awesome because she would be really boring if that was all she had. And honestly, it's fun to see this perfect mix of someone who has, I guess, stereotypical girl traits with the super badass nature of an anime fighter, you know? Because why can't you have stereotypical girl traits while also being a badass? That's awesome. That's how you do girl characters well, anime, if anyone is wondering. Not the travesty of Kale and Caulifla, okay? Just because they're strong doesn't mean that they're interesting because they're girls. They're still boring as hell. Erza, on the other hand, is strong and interesting. So anime writers / manga writers / whoever, if you want to know how to do a strong girl character well in anime, then look at Erza Scarlet and please only look at Kale and Caulifla as examples of what not to do. Anyway, I had to get my daily Dragon Ball Super jab in there because that show is so disappointing as a sequel to Dragon Ball. But whatever, let's move back to fairy tale stuff. And after episode 5, we also get introduced to the first mini arc that's not just 2 episodes. And that is the Lullaby arc, where they take on the Eisenwald Dark Guild. Also, I should specify this arc technically starts in episode 5, but to me, episode 5 is just the introduction of Erza and everything else is kind of secondary, especially since most of the action kicks off after episode 5. But it gets introduced in episode 5 fully. And even then, technically, episode 4 already had hints towards it. So, again, the arc is in full swing by episode 6, but it started a bit earlier. Also, yes, it's technically an arc, but it's 4-5 episodes long, so it's very short. and I think it makes more sense to include it with the introductory arc than have it be its own separate entity. But if you want it to be its own separate arc, that's fine. I mean, I'm talking about this on its own for a reason, but just so you know, in my mind, it's still part of the introductory chapters. Anyway, I actually really like this mini arc because it introduces a lot of the key concepts for all of Fairy Tail, those being the Demons of Zareth, which Lullaby is a part of, and then Dark Guilds, which Eisenwald is a part of. Not only that, but Eisenwald has one of my favorite antagonists in Fairy Tail, who is Erigor. And yes, he's not immediately interesting, or at least more interesting than just your average bad guy, but because he gets introduced throughout multiple arcs again and again with character development being present each time, I kind of have a soft spot for him. And that's also why I'm calling him an antagonist and not a villain, because by the end, he's not really a villain anymore, even though in this arc he very much is. Regardless, another reason why I think Erigor is awesome is because you have the first insane fight of the series happening between Erigor and Natsu. I mean, there have been some pretty cool fights up to this moment, and actually, if we're just talking about one-sided fights, the one that Erza has against all of Eisenwald, except for Erigor basically, is right up there with some of the best because it's just awesome. Like, it's so fun, it's so high energy, and it just showcases how strong and how much above everyone else that we've met so far Erza really is. But again, that's not really a fight, it's more of a one-sided massacre. So if we want to call it a fight, sure I guess, but I'm more so talking about the close battles where it's back and forth and you get to see the character's creativity, ingenuity, and powers on full showcase. And the Natsu-Erigor fight has all of those elements. And the way Natsu ends up beating Erigor by basically creating a low-pressure system through the heat of his flames, which is very fun to see because that is geologically accurate, which I appreciated personally, is awesome because he just kind of outsmarts his opponent and again proves my point that I was bringing up in my Natsu video that I made a week ago, where Natsu is very strong, no question about that, but he's not just dumb when it comes to battles, you know? I mean, maybe in real life he has some questionable moments in terms of his decision making, but in battles he really does have some great instincts that lead him to beat opponents that someone else in that same situation wouldn't have been able to beat. Now, to be fair, Natsu does just kind of raise the heat of his flames, which he's able to do through eating the flames that are swirling around Erigor now because of his wind armor. And that is also just a very common thing for Natsu to do. But I still like the way that they handle this conflict by having two opponents that are probably close in power at that point, with one of them having a negative matchup, being Natsu, still overcoming the other because of their own creativity. It's also hilarious when you just have Happy explain the science behind it, being like, ah yes, Natsu's flames are now creating a low-pressure system that is attracting all of Erigor's winds away from his body, thus making him vulnerable to attacks. I don't know why, but I just think it's really funny to have Happy just kind of explain that as the battle is raging on. Anyway, the last thing I want to talk about for these first 10 episodes is when they battle Lullaby, which is a very interesting fight, because this is still one of the Demons of Zareth, and Natsu, Erza, and Grey just kind of demolish it. Like, it looks like they're having some trouble at first, but then once they really get going, yeah, Lullaby just kind of explodes. I think both literally and figuratively. So, I mean, they're already really strong at this point in the series, which is fun to see because I think out of all of the shonen anime / manga that have these specific sets of power, Fairy Tail is one of the ones that has the least, I don't know, ridiculous power-ups. I mean, they're still there, but I never felt like they were on the same level as, I don't know, the Dragon Ball ones, for example, or even the Naruto ones. Or heck, even Hunter x Hunter, which is another one of my favorite animes. Fairy Tail really does feel like the characters get stronger, but they're not 20,000 times stronger by the end of the series than they were at the beginning. So now, for the rating for this first arc slash collection of episodes, and I think a good 7.5 out of 10. Yeah, because I'm doing this on the scale of other Fairy Tail arcs, and it's definitely not one of the better ones, but at the same time, it's an introductory arc, and those are always hard to pull off, in my opinion. And this one does get you invested very quickly. I remember when I first watched Fairy Tail, by episode 2, I was fully into it. So I think 7.5 is a good rating. If I were to give it a rating compared to other introductory arcs for different animes, though, probably 8.5. I think it's definitely quite a bit above average for other anime. But for the Fairy Tail scaling, I think 7.5 is pretty good. Also, just so everyone knows, when I'm talking about the scaling, this is not a scale that goes from 0 to 10 in terms of every Fairy Tail arc falling somewhere between 0 and 10 and covering all of the numbers. It's more like, I know what a 10 looks like on the Fairy Tail arc scale, and I'm judging these arcs accordingly. Regardless, let's move on to the Deliora arc, and I love this arc. I really do. Maybe it's because I'm a huge Grey fan, but I think I became a Grey fan because of this arc. And the reason for that is that it's very compelling, both from a character standpoint and a storyline standpoint. This is still a short arc. I mean, I don't think it even cracks 10 episodes, but it's the first time that you can see the backstory of one of Fairy Tail's characters. And it's pretty awesome because most of the main cast has some very compelling backstories. And Grey's might be one of my favorites. I would say my all-time favorite, but I think I still prefer Erza's over his. But it's right up there. There's also Mavis's backstory, actually, which was given its own full arc. So that one is probably my favorite overall, because Fairy Tail Zero is awesome. But that's also kind of like Mavis's life and not just her backstory. So it's a bit different, I think. But regardless, Grey's is still up there as one of the best. You also get to meet more recurring characters, those being Leon and his friends slash goons in this arc. I don't know how you want to call them. And they're pretty fun. I do like them, especially Leon. I think he's a good foil to Grey, who starts off being more of your stereotypical, oh, I felt betrayed by the main character and so now I turned evil type of, well, character. But then by the end of the series, he's very much more like, oh, well, this guy is my rival and we have a complicated past together, but we've also been able to grow as people because of it, and we have this mutual respect for each other while also sharing a very genuine bond. And I like these stories a lot, so having a character that has this type of connection to the cast, especially this early in the series, that's pretty good, at least in my opinion. Also, the whole reviving Deliora just so he can defeat it on his own concept for Leon, I think is great because it showcases just how he's kind of dealing with grief, because he doesn't really know how to properly process his teacher slash parental figure being gone. So instead, he focuses on the, oh, I wanted to become stronger than her, so as long as I can do that, it's all fine aspect of his personality. And that drives him to ridiculous lengths, but it also shows just how much our emotions can really control us, to the point that what we were trying to achieve is kind of lost and we're now just obsessed with this specific goal that we think will fix everything, when in reality it will probably just make things worse. Also, the battles between Grey and Leon are awesome, and Grey's character development is fantastic to see, because he goes from being someone who is basically willing to throw his life away without giving it much thought, just because he thinks that that's the best way to help his friends, to then being someone who is really fighting not just for his friends, but also for his own life, because he realizes how much he means to everyone else. And I think that's a great character progression for anyone, but especially for Gray, who is very distant at the beginning of Fairy Tail in terms of his bonds. Yeah, it's cool to see that he finally realizes that people really do care about him. And also, this is another example of how grief can really impact someone, because the reason Gray is so distant at the beginning of the series is that he's already lost so many people he cares about, and he doesn't really want to put himself out there and risk experiencing that loss again. And so seeing him move past that and kind of accept Fairy Tail as his family fully for the first time, it's pretty great. I mean, honestly, it's pretty great. I guess I should also mention that there's a whole plot twist with the Curse of the Island not being them turning into demons, but actually being that they forgot they were demons who could just take on the appearance of a human. I think that's kind of hilarious and definitely the kind of wacky shenanigans that we can expect from Fairy Tail going forward. And honestly, they're pretty great because we do have some very serious topics in Fairy Tail. I mean, again, this whole arc was about grief, but they're also able to pick their moments with the more lighthearted segments, I guess, and really balance them in a way that neither detracts from the other and both add to the story. Another awesome moment is when Erza just throws her spear at the moon to destroy it because she realizes there's just basically a giant dome covering that part of the sky that she has to get rid of. And she uses Natsu's firepower, literal firepower, and her own strength. And it's just hilarious to just see everyone being like, there's no way. And then it slowly gets to the moon, and everyone's faces are just like, oh my gosh. Like, the people on the island are cheering because they think that the curse is going to get lifted. Lucy and Greg are losing their mind because I think the moon is about to get destroyed. Again, perfect comedic relief that just adds to the story and doesn't take anything away from the more dramatic moments. I should also mention that there's technically 2 episodes between this one and the Phantom Lord one, but one is just for fun with them changing bodies through Changeling, and then the other one is, I mean, it doesn't really fit with either arc, but it is a very important one because it's when we first see some of Happy and Natsu's backstories, as well as get introduced to Lisanna. So I think I'll talk about them more with Phantom Lord because Lisanna becomes more prominent as a character there, even though she's still not technically back, but she gets talked about more. So that one will just be left for the next review. And again, the other one is just Changeling, which is a perfectly fine comedic episode, but nothing else to really say about it. And now, time for my rating of the Deliora arc. And I think this is a good 8.5 out of 10. Again, I really like all of the Gray stuff, and I think it sets up a lot of good precedents for future Fairy Tail arcs, as well as introducing some really awesome recurring characters. So I think 8.5 is a very good rating for it. For anyone wondering why I'm not giving it a 9 or a 10, that's mostly because it's still not one of the all-time best Fairy Tail arcs, which honestly I think just boils down to the fact that it's A, short, and B, the stakes are not as high as some of the ones we see in the future. But still, for an 8/9 episode arc, I think 8.5, that's pretty good. But that will do it for us here today. Let me know what you think of both my rating for these 2 arcs and just of these 2 arcs in general. And I hope you enjoyed the video, of course. If you want to see more Fairy Tail content, then I do recommend subscribing. And I hope to see you all in the next video. But until then, remember to follow the way of the ace. See ya!